curses. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you believe you've been cursed? Perhaps you cheated on an assignment and that landed you in a perpetual state of getting Fs. Or maybe you watched a particular film that seemed to result in you only watching bad films from that point. Or maybe, and I'm just spitballing ideas here, you made a video that you felt cursed your channel to underperform. Either way, one way or the other, you felt cursed. Now, what if I were to tell you right now that curses exist in FNAF? There's undeniable proof of their existence. It's not a theory, it's a fact. But what if I were to stretch this even farther and let you in on a little secret? The entire FNAF story is cursed. But first, it'd be beneficial to know the origins of curses are unknown, though the oldest origins of curses seem to date back to the days of the Egyptians. The Pharaoh's Curse, now associated with someone being cursed with a bunch of sand, actually was a real thing people actually believed in. Carved on the walls of pharaohs' tombs were curses explaining how the individual unlucky enough to enter the tomb had been cursed for the misdeed of potentially grave robbing it. Did this method work? Well, ask the lady who broke King Tut's nose. No, it did not. But even with unknown origins, we do have a definition for what a curse is. According to Oxford's definitions, a curse is defined as a solemn utterance intended to invoke a supernatural power to inflict harm or punishment on someone or something. This gives us a nice baseline to go off of when comparing the real-life version of a curse to the heavily altered version that may appear in FNAF. You know, as well as I do, that FNAF likes to bend the rules to what certain supernatural elements are. Instead of explicit ghosts, the series often leans towards ideas like remnant or agony to create some supernatural beings, and as I'll discuss later, FNAF might have heavily taken inspiration from other sources to come up with these ideas. But without getting too ahead of ourselves, let's dive into... FNAF actually gives us a starting point for the rules of a curse in the franchise, outlining for us what to expect when curses show up and likely how they are formed. All of this information is given to us in the Fazbear Frights story, Step Closer. Step Closer is the titular, I'm using titular correctly this time, so screw off, first story in the fourth book in the franchise. The story follows our main character, Pete. Pete is a troubled kid whose parents' divorce leaves him as the man of his single-parented house. With this newly acquired title, Pete has to look after his younger brother, Chuck. Pete has a particular disdain for his wimpy younger brother. Pete views Chuck as weak and annoying, so you can only imagine his annoyance when he has to babysit him. On a particular day where Pete is watching over Chuck at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, he figures enough is enough and decides to give his brother a little scare. He drags his brother backstage and tries to terrify him in the dark maintenance room. Unbeknownst to him, in the room lurks an out-of-order Foxy. Foxy springs to life, and while Chuck is able to get away, Pete isn't so lucky. His shirt gets caught on a nail, and for a brief moment, something strange happens. A shiver skittered down Pete's spine. He swallowed his gum. He couldn't move his gaze away from Foxy's yellow eyes as he sang. Didn't know why, just dumb old robot. You can be a pirate, but first you'll have to lose an eye and an arm. Yarg. First you'll have to lose an eye and an arm. Yarg. First you'll have to lose an eye and an arm. Yarg. First you'll have to lose an eye and an arm. The old animatronic was stuck on the same lyric. First you'll have to lose an eye and an arm. Pete blinked as a strange feeling came over him, like an invisible, cold, heavy blanket was covering every inch of his body, then sinking through his skin and into his bones. "First you'll have to lose an eye and an arm." Yark. The room grew still with a sudden silence, yet Pete remained standing there in the dark, unmoving. He blinked and looked around, trying to remember where he was. He was in the dark. Already, something supernatural is happening. The strange cold, the feeling of something sinking into his very core. It's almost as if he's infected with something, almost as if he was cursed. Later on in the story, Pete comes to the very same realization as the reader. The Foxy animatronic did curse him. However, its motives still seem unclear. The curse puts Pete into a multitude of positions where he's threatened with harm, specifically harm to his eye and arm. It starts out small but still worrisome. The blade of a scalpel nearly falling into his eye, a giant meat cleaver nearly cutting his hand off. But these accidents very quickly turn freakish. A saw blade flying towards his hand, a fish hook nearly stabbing his eye, until he has a dream. A dream where Foxy attacks him, specifically aiming for his eye and arm. Strangely, Pete had been having dreams like this since the start of the curse, though less vivid. It seems as the curse goes on longer, it attaches itself more violently to its host. Eventually, Pete, nearly about to go back to Freddy Fazbear's to break his curse, is unfortunately hit by a truck in an accident that results in his death. At the morgue, strangely, supernaturally, Pete is still conscious. Though he is very much dead, but stuck in his own body. Kinda like Get Out. Anyways, the doctors cut off his eye and arm as Pete was a registered organ donor. The story ends with Chuck visiting the very same Foxy that cursed Pete. However, with his death comes satisfaction to the old animatronic that lays there, motionless. This story has a lot to unpack about what a curse is in FNAF, so let's first go through some of the rules it presents us with. Ghostly curse rules! Rule number 1! A curse can be given to someone without direct contact with them. Pete is only maintaining eye contact with Foxy when he is cursed. Foxy doesn't grab him or anything. Rule number 2, a curse can be given by agony. Doesn't have to be a real being. Now, what do I mean by this one? Well, in Stitch Race Stinger number 10, we learn of Eleanor's involvement in this story, likely possessing the Foxy animatronic that curses Pete. He was standing in the doorway of an operating room. 2 men in surgical scrubs stood over a table on which a motionless young boy was strapped. His eyes were open wide and stayed open even after one of the surgeons tried closing them. Behind the boy's head, holding him down by his shoulders, was the smiling clown girl. We later learned that Eleanor is a creature of agony, specifically the agony left behind from Afton's heinous actions, and so using this, we can deduce that agony can create curses and administer it onto other people that are then cursed themselves. There's one more line from this story that I believe is important to keep in the back of your mind for later into the video, and it comes from an inconspicuous mention of a video game Chuck is playing. Chuck explained the game. You see, I'm the mage, and I have to look for all of the hidden ingredients to make a potion to stop an evil wizard. He has my village under a spell, and I need to break the curse with the potion and release the village before it's too late. This passage is clearly telling us something, and before we move on to how this connects to the games, I think we need to first talk about Freddy Frostbear. Or not, the next section has literally nothing to do with Freddy Frostbear. I just wanted to make sure that you're still paying attention. You better stay safe. You better not die. You better not cry.
My name is Freddy
Fazbear's coming to town.
You've seen The Grudge, right? Trust me, this is integral to understanding this theory. Ju-on the Grudge was released in the USA on January 1st, 2003, and follows a social worker named Rika who is assigned to an old lady living in a cursed home in Japan. We learn throughout the events of the film that the home was cursed by the agonizing deaths of Kayako and her son Toshio at the hands of their husband and father, Takeo. The curse affects anyone who steps inside the building, and after their deaths affects the place they happen to die in, like a weird checkpoint for curses. Unfortunately, Rika and some other poor unfortunate souls end up entering the house without knowledge or doubtful knowledge of the curse. Each person is subsequently killed in various gruesome fashions that lead to them being assimilated into the curse, becoming spirits tethered to it. The curse is a parasitic force that is able to alter whatever it pleases in order to enact its horrific vengeance. The curse, even at times, can bend the rules of reality. This supernatural ability of the curse is best demonstrated in what is probably the most iconic scene in the film: the blanket scene. Early on into the film's terror, we see the plot through the eyes of Hitomi, whose family became an owner of the cursed home. As we follow her, she is quickly tormented by the curse that ends with her being pulled into her covers, where she is never seen again. The film is a masterclass in horror and suspense, with some of the most iconic imagery in horror and film as a whole. And also, it ties to Freddy Fazbear. Let me explain. Fallfest, 1972. This is all that remains of it. After him. But how did we get here? What led to the unfortunate events that burned down this tradition to a crisp? Well, let's rewind and find out, starting with Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic was graced to us by the metallic sheep gods from above and graced our computers on June 13th, 2025. And to say this game changed everything would be an understatement, a massive understatement. In fact, the idea I'm going to propose might literally change everything. So, let's take a look at what this game tells us. I'm sure you probably know all of this, so I'll be quick. Don't worry. Secret of the Mimic's story starts with Edwin Murray. No, not him, Edwin Murray Sr. Edwin Murray Sr. is the original founder of Murray's Costume Manor and is doing all right. Nothing too successful, however, somewhere else in Utah, another brand is growing: Fazbear Entertainment. Writing off the success of their Fredbear singing show at the local event Fallfest, they are looking for ways to expand. And what way isn't better than planting your heels in other forms of entertainment? Kids loved the singing Fredbear, so they decide to expand this idea into something bigger. And to do this, they reach out to Edwin Murray Sr. He's doubtful to say the least, and for some reason doesn't trust this company, this Fazbear Entertainment, and this is an untrustworthiness that will last for years. Around the same time, Edwin Murray Jr. is working in his family business. His father happens to hire a worker named Fiona Murray that Edwin takes a liking to. He meets her when trying to find a voice for his personal invention that would later be turned into Mr. Helpful. They hit it off, and unfortunately, Edwin Murray Sr. dies, leaving his company to his son, though he leaves his son with an important piece of advice: to not trust Fazbear Entertainment. Unfortunately, Edwin doesn't listen. With the Costume Manor in Edwin's hands, he begins to rebrand it to be more towards his inventions, and he strikes gold. He creates the Cleanovac that becomes a success. Everyone loves it, and it gives Edwin a sense of security. Unfortunately, this was taken advantage of. Soon, an unknown brand reaches out to Edwin, asking him to create designs and suits for their brand Chica's Party World. Fiona creates the design, Edwin makes the suit, and it's a mutual success for the both of them. Things are looking up for both of them. But soon, Fazbear reaches out to Edwin, the dreaded brand. The partnership seems to be a major success, such a success that Edwin considers making some of the Fazbear characters a part of his brand, coming up with a model for a Murray's Costume Manor that includes Freddy and Bonnie on the stained glass window. Fazbear then commissions them, this being the biggest deal yet. They tasked them with creating designs for their more popular characters, Freddy Fazbear, Bonnie the Bunny, their newly acquired Chica the Chicken, and Foxy the Pirate Fox. This is weird, and I'll talk about why later. And, of course, Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. However, this time, it doesn't go as smoothly. Fiona creates the designs for the characters, and Edwin, along with Fazbear Entertainment, like them. However, at the last second, and without warning, Fazbear Entertainment changes the designs of the characters. This sets Edwin, along with Fiona, off, who reminds Edwin that they aren't friends. Edwin realizes she's right, but somehow, someone knew she said this.
Ed, I hope this message reaches you as soon as you get a break. I have to go help the Fallfest crew, just for a few days until the installation is finished. It's hard to explain. I just have this terrible feeling like I need to be there so nothing goes wrong, just in case.
But why would Fiona go to Fallfest? What was the reason? What exactly ties her to Fallfest for her to be actively communicating with the people in charge of it? Well, I believe that this was Foxy's water ride, but we'll get to why later. For now, she's there, and someone who doesn't like her knows. Remember the Grudge? How an agonizing death can curse the things within proximity to it? For the Sayakis, it was their home. But for Fiona and those within the burning Fallfest, it was what was in Fallfest. He did it. And it was this action, this decision of silencing the person telling Edwin Fazbear Entertainment wasn't his friend, that cursed what was within Fallfest, and soon, it would curse Edwin. Not long after the death of Fiona, MCM would be struggling. There, the creative was gone, and Edwin was spiraling. He needed her. He had neglected her in life, only viewing her as a stereotypical housewife, and with this vision of her, he remade her, making a robotic version of Fiona that would mimic her, but it wasn't actually her, despite what Edwin thought. Even still, he cared for David, their only child, and that was enough. Edwin was still at a low enough for Fazbear Entertainment to get an idea. They were going to take from Edwin. They just needed a little more to push him even further. So, Afton had an idea. It was David's 5th birthday. Edwin was busy setting up the party inside while David played in his new playground. M1 Fiona was inside. She'd baked David a cake. So Edwin asked it to go grab David. It wouldn't return with his boy. At the playground, David would be greeted by a mysterious figure. Somehow, some way, using David's favorite ball, the figure lured David just out of the way and murdered him. M1 came just in time to witness it. It was Afton, and he, being on the premises of Murray's Costume Manor, spread the Fallfest curse like an infectious disease, seeping into the core of the factory. Edwin, crazed with the death of his child, began building, trying to copy the mimic he designed to be Fiona, but somehow, even though he was able to do it perfectly the first time, it just wasn't working. The curse had already taken into effect, dooming Edwin down a spiral of obsession, and with this manic obsession, he didn't notice his company falling right from his grasp. Fazbear started taking employees, ideas, but most of all, it wanted the mimic. Edwin was beginning to suspect something was up, so he started sending out memos, firing his admins for giving ideas, talking about his distrust in Fazbear and Hin in Afton. How his father had been right, but it was too late. His company was done. His life was over. He was able to recreate a semblance of David, but it wasn't him. So, in a blind rage, he attacked it. And with this action, the mimic lived up to its name. It mimicked the violence back on Edwin, leaving the fate of Edwin unknown. Edwin Murray was the first victim of what I'm dubbing the Fallfest Curse. Think of the Pharaoh's Curse, but instead of sand, it's Fallfest goo. The curse would spread far and wide, its next victim being Fredbear's in the infamous Bite of 83. But there is a part of the Fallfest Curse I haven't mentioned. Foxy. Have you ever wondered why Foxy was out of order? Why it seemed Foxy had nothing but bad luck throughout the franchise? I mean, think about it. In FNAF 1, Foxy is out of order. In FNAF 2, Mangle is torn apart, while Withered Foxy is the only one affected by flashlights. FNAF 3 doesn't count. FNAF 4 has Foxy cause the Bite of 83. FNAF's sister location has Didophobia, where Funtime Foxy is a crumbled up shell on the floor. FNAF Security Breach doesn't even have Foxy, and in Ruin, we learn about his canceled log flume ride. All of this string of bad luck associated with Foxy. But why? We already know there's a precedent for Foxy being cursed. Hell, there's an entire story about it. Well, let's take a look at Fiona. Fiona is the creator of Foxy. Now I know what you're saying. Pack it up, FREDD'N. You've lost it. Our goat is washed. Never theorize again. But just hear me out, okay? In Secret of the Mimic, there is a very bizarre and abrupt sequence where you assemble a Springlock suit and are then put into a puppet show. First Mate Foxy's puppet show, to be exact. And to say that the whole thing feels out of place would be an understatement. For some odd reason, the game wants us to know that Edwin has a theater exclusively playing this very show. Furthermore, earlier before this sequence, we learn about TV producers coming to see the puppet show in action. But why? Why would Edwin want TV producers to pick up a show made by Fazbear Entertainment? Foxy is a character created by Fazbear's, isn't he? Well, that's the very thing. He isn't. He was created by Fiona. We see this in one of the birthday reels in the Parachute.exe ending. Edwin outright says Fiona made the puppets. Notice how Foxy has always been separated from the main gang? He's always tucked away in a cove, either it being Pirates Cove or Kids Cove. And that's because Foxy was separate, a separate character entirely. An MCM character. An MCM character that was given new life at a little attraction named Fallfest. But here's when we tie everything together, and that comes with the Curse of Dreadbear DLC kind of came out of left field, and I know I can't be the only one who thought that. Suddenly, in a game meant to tie into Security Breach, we are dropped into Fallfest 83, a random festival that happens decades before the plot of the game. Hell, Help Wanted is an end-universe game along with this DLC. Not to mention this DLC having obvious references to the Bite of 83, it all makes you wonder what is going on. Well, I believe that there is a correlation between Fallfest and the Bite of 83, and that is because Fallfest caused the bite, the effects of it. Remember, the curse of Fallfest. It was born from Fallfest. I'll get to that more later. But this DLC gave us one more interesting thing of note for this video, and that was Captain Foxy's boat ride. Apparently, according to this DLC, there was a Captain Foxy's ride set in Fallfest. I know what you might be saying. Well, you said this was DLC that exists in Universe, so by that extension, we aren't actually in the Fallfest attraction, Captain Foxy's boat ride. So how can you even be sure it actually exists? And that's where I present you with these. cutouts in Security Breach from this very attraction spread out through the location. The boat ride is real and was probably a reoccurring attraction for there to be actual cutouts from it. But what importance does this ride have to anything? Bear with me a little bit, and I swear I'll tell you. But first, we have to talk about one more thing. Help Wanted 2. If you thought Help Wanted 1 was weird, well, Help Wanted 2 is another story. In Help Wanted 2, you play as someone, all right, but most importantly, this game is more overtly connected to Fallfest. Throughout the game, there are multiple references to Fallfest. In the game, you can find a poster for Fallfest 1970 just hung up on the walls of Freddy's Pizza Place. Not to mention a poster of Fazbear characters at Fallfest, with Foxy noticeably being in his Captain Foxy uniform. But furthermore, we get 2 entire minigames actually taking place in Fallfest: the Carousel and Phaser Blast. The Carousel level has you repairing a carousel while being hunted down by Moon. This carousel is clearly dated to Fallfest. Outside, you can even see the same visual location as seen in Curse of Dreadbear, but the interesting thing here is that it ends in flames, specifically with a character dubbed Jacko Moon. Jacko Moon, as we'll see, is very representative of the Fallfest fire. In fact, the next time we see this character, it's in the Foxy Log Flume ride. Clearly, this ride is a successor to the Fallfest attraction, using similar cutouts, but even using the same character, Captain Foxy. The weird thing about this level is that randomly Jacko Moon appears. He's not even supposed to be in this level, something we can tell by the glitching purple effects whenever he appears. He's added in. And as him previously being a calling card of the Fallfest fire, it's only fair to assume that he is the fire here, taunting in the ultimately canceled log ride. But even stranger is the imagery. Throughout the level, we see imagery that harkens back to the Murrays. Throughout Secret of the Mimic, we see repeated imagery of baby owls, specifically in Moon.exe. These baby owls represent David Murray. Basically, Sun and Moon are Fiona and Edwin. There is a baby owl mask, and it makes Moon cry by reminding him of his son, David. And right here, in the ride, is an owl gravestone being guarded by the Moon, David and Edwin. Also in this ride is a saloon. This saloon is a callback to Fiona's very own Deadeye Roxy. Now, what does this all mean? Well, I think we are supposed to make a connection between the Murrays and Captain Foxy and lead to the conclusion that Fiona died on Captain Foxy's water ride. Notice how Captain Foxy's water ride in Curse of Dreadbear has the Jacko animatronics, FNAF 4 animatronics that are on fire, and the Murray's household is literally the FNAF 4 house. It all seems too clear to me. Fiona died on this very ride, Captain Foxy's water ride. But finally, there's more. I've intentionally left this minigame for the end, and that's the last minigame about Fallfest and Help Wanted 2 is Phaser Blast, and this one is very weird. While this minigame is intentionally Fallfest coded, being carnival themed, having Dreadbear, a character last seen in Fallfest 83, and literally setting on fire like the repeated imagery of Fallfest we've seen so far, but despite all of this, it's very focused on Fazbears. In fact, this minigame seems to bring us through all of FNAF. We have FNAF 1, FNAF 2, FNAF 3. Dreadbear is representative of FNAF 4 due to him being a clear bite victim metaphor. We even have Sister Location through the plush babies and Pizzeria Simulator through the Rockstar-themed Carney. And of course, Security Breach through it being about Phaser Blast itself. But why? Why is this framed through Fallfest? Well, I believe this is showing us the Fallfest Curse, how it was behind every event in FNAF, every game. It all leads back to Afton burning down Fallfest and the agony of that tragedy being powerful enough to create a curse that leads to everything in the games, that dooms anyone involved to horrible fates. The MCI, the DCI, Charlotte Emily, and even William himself. But how do we know that Afton is behind this? How do we know that Afton is the one who burnt down Fallfest? Well, Fazbear tells us that too. Remember how I mentioned that Fazbear takes us through the games? Well, it does this in a very interesting way. By framing each game as a carnival game you have to go through. Each game, you have to throw balls, pop balloons, and survive plush babies to survive until the fire. The Fallfest fire burns down the entire attraction, and that's when we're left with one more game. To survive against Springtrap, to survive against Afton. You're in the burned down remains of Fallfest, alone, but not entirely. There with you is Afton, hunting you down, standing through the remains of the attraction, and to me, this confirms that Afton was behind the Fallfest fire. It's so different from the other retellings of the games in Fazbear that it feels intentional. Afton did it, and the curse it spawns did everything else. Now it's up for Gregory and Cassie to try to finally put an end to it, or perhaps they'll fall to the curse like everyone else. But even then, we still have one more thing. Fredbear. There's one more character we need to talk about. Fredbear. He's an integral part of this curse too, because Fredbear is also cursed. This section is a lot shorter than the others, but I felt like it needed to be added. Fredbear was an attraction at Fallfest. Thanks to evidence pointed out by Fazbear Entertainment, this Fallfest ticket talks about free pizza at a wagon. Fredbear's singing show says there's food and entertainment, and the mural of Freddy and Bonnie have a wagon directly below them, almost as if they spawned directly from it. And this all points to Fredbear's singing show being a Fallfest attraction. Furthermore, this helps explain the curse of Dreadbear. What is Dreadbear's correlation with Fallfest? Dreadbear is a clear parallel to Bite Victim who possesses Fredbear. Dreadbear's name is even a play on the name Fredbear. This is important because Fredbear originates from and is cursed by Fallfest. Fallfest is the curse of Dreadbear. Boom, bam, bum. Now, we can finally get into I truly think I'm onto something here. All of these connections seem too close to be coincidental, not even mentioning things like the DLC being literally called Curse of Dreadbear, or the story about curses, Step Closer, literally being about Foxy. I mean, come on, you know? Of course, there is one problem and something I'm still trying to figure out, and that involves Foxy as well. It's him being a part of the Fazbear project, and him being on the poster with Freddy and the gang at Fallfest. It seems to imply that Foxy has been a part of the Fazbear gang just as long as he's been an MCM character, and it's weird because both have tons of evidence for each other despite contradicting one another. It's too hard to say, but that's when you come in. What do you think? Do you think I'm crazy or onto something? Hell, do you even believe in curses yourself? What's your favorite example of a curse in media? Leave a comment down below and tell me. But for now, that's the curse of Fallfest.